Batman, one of the most popular and famous characters ever. Created in 1939 by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, he's been a mainstay on television, in video games, in comics, and in movies as well. Batman is iconic and everlasting. What also helps make Batman great is his rogues gallery, filled to the brim with some of the best villains ever. Mr. Freeze, Bane, my personal favorite Scarecrow, and of course the most popular, the Clown Prince of Crime, the Joker. First debuting in Batman #1 in 1940, he's been the most enduring foil to all of Batman's heroics. He's a character that has transcended all forms of media and is arguably more popular than the Batman himself. He's also been one of the most consistently used villains in the movies as well, starting all the way back with the Adam West series. The first actor to play him was Cesar Romero. This is where I personally got familiar with the character since I used to watch the reruns all the time on TV Land. I think Romero's Joker gets overlooked a lot because of the campiness of the 60s series, but he's completely ridiculous, but oh so hilarious. This Joker at least knows how to hang 10.
Joker's good.
This guy was so evil, he refused to shave his mustache for the makeup. Jack Nicholson took on the role in 1989 and was fantastic. For a long time, he was the most iconic Joker and was a high benchmark for any future actors to meet. He perfectly encapsulates the dynamic of the character. The manic energy just makes him really unpredictable and fun to watch. He has this perfect sweet spot where he's funny, but also a bit scary. You know, like Jack Nicholson in real life. Then you have arguably the best Joker, Heath Ledger. The Dark Knight will forever go down as a high point for superhero films. Even though I hate it brought about that wave of overly grimdark comic book movies, you know, the ones that didn't understand that being dark and gritty wasn't a substitute for good characters and story, it still stands as a fantastic film with an even more fantastic villain. Ledger's Joker is iconic and so good it basically overshadows the rest of the film. It's hard to have a conversation about The Dark Knight without talking about Ledger's Joker. His performance was so good it even won a posthumous Oscar, one of the very few to do so. Even though Ledger's Joker isn't my personal favorite, he still is in my opinion the best live-action Joker. And now you got the bad one. Jared Leto from Suicide Squad. Now, before I say anything, just know, none of my criticism is thrown directly at Leto. He's a fine actor and I think he could have made a fantastic Joker if given the right circumstances. However, wow, this was absolutely terrible, and I don't understand what they were going for or how it could have worked. The stupid tattoos, the grills, and him being an absolute waste of time in the film. Just an awful, terrible movie and a terrible portrayal of the character. The level of incompetence was staggering. I'd also have a brain aneurysm if I forgot to mention some of the amazing voice actors who have played the character as well. So now we get to the subject of today's video, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker in his 2019 film, Joker. The film has gotten a lot of praise from critics and fans alike, going on to be nominated for multiple Oscars and having Phoenix take home the gold for Best Actor. Needless to say, this has been a very divisive film. Some people love this and others absolutely hate it. Where do I fit on the spectrum? Do I hold the same opinion as many others on the internet? Well, let's dig into this thing to find out. The film stars Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck, an aspiring stand-up comedian who lives in a 70s Gotham City. He works as a clown and takes care of his older mother, but after a downward spiral of events, he inadvertently starts a movement that threatens the very balance of society. Now, I'll start by saying I don't like the idea of giving the Joker an origin. At all. To me, it really weakens the presence of his character. When we did get a bit of an origin with the Killing Joke, he even prefaces it by saying he doesn't even know if it's true anymore. He fell into a vat of chemicals and is insane. That's really all you need to know about the character in my opinion. The Dark Knight understood this by having him give multiple different origin stories. To me, giving him a motivation makes him less interesting. Now, despite my protest, I do think that the story does a good job with what it sets out to do. The film has this gruff, gritty aesthetic that's straight out of Taxi Driver, which is a compliment and a complaint at the same time. It's strange to say, but the film is also beautiful while being disgusting. Many scenes feel like the cinematographer slathered the camera in dirt. It reminds me of Sin City with how almost everything you see makes you feel gross and dirty after doing so. A big plot point in the film is the ongoing sanitation strike, which leaves the Gotham streets literally covered in trash. It helps establish the civil unrest in the city that really boils over and starts unifying under the symbol of the clown. The biggest issue with this story is that I've seen it done before and sadly done better. The influences are clearly on the sleeves of this film. While in some cases it works, in others it really comes off as generic. In many ways, it feels like a person trying so hard to be Martin Scorsese and only succeeding at copying his style. Now, even though I don't think the story and aesthetics are 100% there, the one area that this film does do really well with is its characters. The film really doesn't have a large supporting cast. There are a few important characters like Arthur's mother, Penny Fleck, played by Frances Conroy. She's a character that starts out very simple, the kind older mother who wants the best for her son. But the film smartly uses that to lull you into a sense of security, because her story turns out very different from where it started. Conroy does a really good job and sells this character. Next on our list, Sophie Drummond, Arthur's neighbor played by Zazie Beetz. She's a character who really is interesting since we simultaneously know everything about her, and yet we know nothing at the same time. From what we do know, I did end up liking and would have hoped to see more of her in the movie, but, that's how things are. We're also introduced to Thomas Wayne, father of Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, played by Brett Cullen. I think having Thomas Wayne in this movie was such a wasted opportunity, and they really go the exact wrong direction they should have with this character. It really feels like they only added him into the film just for the name recognition and for the audience to say, "Hey look, it's Batman's parents." He's just a means to an end and doesn't serve a real purpose at the end of the day. We rarely get to see Thomas Wayne in any form of media, unless he's getting shot. So to have him here and not use him is really disappointing. He just comes off as forgettable and bland, only there to further beat the theme of class division into your head. After that, we have Murray Franklin, the host of a late-night talk show. Murray is a takeoff of Johnny Carson. Who? Oh, if you don't know who that is, just ask your parents. Jesus, or maybe your grandparents. He's your basic talk show host when it comes to the dry wit. Overall, he really does come off looking way better than you'd initially think he would by seeing this movie. His character really is heavily influenced by a lesser-known Scorsese film, The King of Comedy, in which a struggling comedian, also played by Robert De Niro, kidnaps his favorite talk show host in order to get famous. While the connections are purely surface level for the most part, I think Joker would have done better if it had emulated the dark comedy of the film, but I'll get to that a little bit more later. Finally, we get to the Joker himself. I think Phoenix's performance is one of the consistent saving graces of this film, and he single-handedly carries this thing on his shoulders. The physical changes alone were what really sold me on Phoenix's commitment to the role. He looks utterly grotesque in some of these scenes. Even something simple as him lying on a couch looks like otherworldly and so strange. There's also this unease you get from him during many scenes of the film. It's like knowing anything at the moment could set him off, and some scenes just build that tension perfectly. Phoenix really does a good job of being socially awkward too. As a person who had a huge problem with that for a long time, I feel your pain, bro. You can see the influence of his movements from people like Charlie Chaplin, which really does explain a lot of the motions that he has, like the famous dancing on the steps, or him even running down the street to chase a group of kids who stole a sign. Now that could also just be him trying to run in these giant clown shoes, but my point still stands. Arthur's a character that tries to help shine a light on how horribly we treat people with mental illness. You consistently see social programs being cut, him not being able to get his medicine, which itself is a symptom of the system that really doesn't try and fix a problem. It just tries to put a band-aid over it and worry about it later. This guy goes through a lot over the course of the film, and there's no wonder you see him finally snap. That also is a big issue with the character as well. You want him to be a symbol for society's undesirables, but you end up just making them all look like insane murderers. The main thing you succeed to do is create a fear of the mentally ill. All you said is, take care of the mentally ill, or else they'll snap and go on murder sprees. It's a fine line to walk, but I think it missed the mark. If this was a dark comedy instead of a straightforward drama, I don't think it would be as big of a problem. The angle of how you tackle a subject is almost as important as the message itself. Now on a lighter note, I think the Joker's makeup itself is really good. It does a perfect job at getting a new, iconic look without directly taking any specific influence from other iterations. What I do think is the ultimate problem with this film, and its biggest shortcoming, is the fact that Arthur gets too self-righteous towards the end and starts wallowing in self-pity. It just comes off as whining to me. I think the ultimate flaw with giving him a woe is me moment is that this dude at this point has murdered people. Even if they were justified, you lose sympathy for me pretty fast after you do it. Then you try to get around this by having him only kill people who have wronged him, which, while fine, makes him look even worse in my opinion. Now you're giving the psychotic murderer a platform and not adequately punishing him enough for the awful things that he does. And to me, this is why a villain and anti-hero focused stories are really difficult to get correct. If you don't properly call them out on their BS, you look like you're glorifying their terrible deeds. But if you go too hard, you lose that edge that made the character interesting in the first place. The Punisher is a good example of how it's done right. The villains he faces like Jigsaw or Kingpin are so much worse than him. And he still has a moral code. Yes, he kills people, but he only kills the worst of the worst. Drug dealers, pimps, mob bosses, usual criminal scum. But Frank himself is also a criminal, and almost all of his actions aren't painted in this bright light as to justify them. Joker tries to have its cake and eat it too, and it sadly didn't work for me. Okay, so for this section, I'm going to get into some major spoilers at the end of the film, so please skip to this point if you plan on seeing it. So, my second biggest flaw with this film is Thomas and Martha Wayne getting killed at the end. Why? First of all, we've seen the Waynes get murdered enough. On top of that, the film goes out of its way to be fair to Thomas Wayne as a character. If you really wanted to support your theme, I think it would have been better if you made him a complete jerk. Make him even more tone deaf to the plight of the inner city. Have him actually beat the crap out of Arthur. Do more to paint him as a worse person. That's the only way you can keep your message alive that the rich don't care about poor people. If that's true, show more examples of him being corrupt or do something to give us a reason to believe you. Maybe have him bind the election, have him bribe officials, something of that sort. Because without that, the worst thing he did was call people clowns. Then there's the Wayne's murder itself. It just makes them look like complete morons. I have so many questions. Like for starters, why would you go to a movie theater in the middle of a protest? You are already the target of people who are angry in the streets since you were the reason they started using the symbol of the clown as a face for their movement. Secondly, why did you leave the theater? After hearing gunshots and loud ruckus, your first thought was, let me leave the safety of this movie theater and go into a secluded area. It's just so dumb. Why did you feel the need to add it into the film whatsoever? Batman isn't really needed in the story about the Joker. You also completely have changed the context of his entire origin. Instead of being a random act of violence that Bruce vows to never let happen to anyone again, it now is basically a targeted hit by some random dude. You seriously have just ruined one of the foundations of his character. When the buzz for this movie was initially starting, they sold it about being a standalone movie without Batman or anything like that. And standalone's thrown right out the window when you murder Batman's parents in the movie. Overall, I think this film is a little bit overrated. While it isn't as bad as some people try to make it out to be, it to me feels like somebody wanted to do a remake of Taxi Driver, but then they threw the Joker into it for no reason. I guarantee if this had nothing to do with the name recognition or brand awareness of the character, this film would have been thrown away and forgotten. It's sometimes painfully by the numbers in some areas, but it is held up entirely by Phoenix's great performance. Without that, the film would be average at best. My hope is that they keep this out of continuity with any other DCEU projects. We do not need another grim and gritty era of comic book films. With that being said, I'm going to give the film a 7 out of 10.